Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte and welcome back to Ex Situ, Operation Wallacea's new series of online lectures. This week we're going to the underwater world and introducing you to Kieran McCloskey, a third-year PhD student from the University of Exeter. Kieran's research is fascinating, looking into noise pollution underwater. So I'm going to hand over to Kieran, say thank you to him, enjoy and come back and watch the rest of our series.
Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. My name is Kieran McCloskey and I'm going to be giving a presentation today on underwater acoustics and noise pollution. I'd like to start by thanking Operation Wallacea for giving me the opportunity to give this online presentation, and I'm very excited to share this information with you all. A little bit about who I am. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Exeter, and I'm studying marine biology, specifically marine bioacoustics and noise pollution. My work incorporates a mix of field, lab, and computer modeling, and I've been lucky enough to conduct my research in some pretty amazing locations. So I've been to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef in Honduras with Operation Wallacea, and I've also conducted research in the United Kingdom where I'm based. As you can tell, I'm not British, I'm actually American, and I've been living in the UK since 2016, working with Operation Wallacea since 2017 when I went on my first summer expedition. This is a general outline of the talk I'll be giving today. I'm going to start with going over underwater sound and hearing, specifically hearing in fish. I'm then going to go on to talk about soundscapes and how we can listen to reefs and use bioacoustics to monitor reef health, monitor biodiversity. I'm going to switch gears then and talk about impacts of anthropogenic noise on aquatic life, and then I would like to end by going over two case studies of work that I've been involved with and kind of tying in all of these concepts together through the applications. And in terms of what I hope you will gain from watching this online lecture, I hope that you'll be able to leave with a basic understanding of the principles of underwater sound and why it is so important for aquatic life. I hope you'll be able to recognize the components of soundscapes and how bioacousticians can use certain qualities of acoustics to monitor habitat health and biodiversity. I hope you'll understand that there are a lot of sources of anthropogenic noise and that these do have impacts on aquatic life. And then I hope you'll be able to get at least an example of some applications of how these concepts can be used for scientific purposes. 60 years ago, the famous explorer Jacques Cousteau brought the wonders of the underwater world into living rooms for the first time. He invented scuba and underwater cameras to capture these incredible images and inspire future generations of aquatic explorers. It was a remarkable film in so many ways, apart from perhaps the title. Jacques Cousteau told us that the ocean was a silent world. We now know that this is not the case, and the underwater world is full of sound. Most will be familiar with whale songs and echolocation, but you'd be surprised by the orchestra of sound that emanates from coral reefs. Benthic invertebrates such as shrimp are constantly snapping. Fish are chorusing to attract mates or defend territories. And together these sounds create an underwater orchestra that give coral reefs an acoustic signature. But before we go any further, we have to discuss some basic physics of underwater sound. I'm not doing this to be cruel, it's actually the physical attributes of underwater sound that make it so important to aquatic life. So there are two main components of acoustic energy: particle motion and sound pressure. Particle motion can be defined as the transfer of vibratory energy outward from a noise source. So as you have a noise source that starts to vibrate, it will cause its neighboring particles to vibrate with it. And then those particles will cause their neighbors to vibrate and so on outward away from a noise source. The second component of sound is sound pressure. And this is defined as the fluctuation of pressure as particles affected by a sound wave compress and retract. So as you have that vibratory energy expanding outward, you'll get areas of high and low density of compression and refraction, and these will be associated with pressure changes, and it's that fluctuation of pressure that we consider sound pressure. Terrestrial animals rely heavily on sound pressure for hearing. In fact, our ears are adapted to sense these changing pressure fluctuations through the inner ear. So as a sound source travels through the air, it will enter the ear and cause the eardrum to vibrate and move mechanically itself. And that mechanical energy will be transferred into electrical signal and then transferred to the brain, and that's how we are able to hear. On the other hand, fish depend on particle motion mainly for hearing, and all fish that have been studied are capable of detecting particle motion. And this happens through a slightly different mechanism. So fish themselves are the same density as the water that surrounds them. So as a sound wave is propagating through the water, it will cause that whole fish and its body to vibrate along with that sound source. Fish have a calcified structure in the inner ear known as the otolith, and this will lag behind the rest of the fish as that fish's body vibrates with that sound source. And so this lag is then transferred into electrical signal, and that's how fish are able to detect sound. They're able to detect direction and distance from this acoustic signal. So the physics and technical portion of my talk is over, and what I really want to convey to you is the difference between our world and the aquatic world, and why sound is so important to the latter. So as humans, we rely heavily on vision to perceive the world around us. And it can be counterintuitive for us to fully comprehend the multi-sensory landscape that exists underwater. With that being said, certain sensory modalities such as vision and olfaction have important limitations to consider. Light transmission decreases with increasing depth and turbidity, which can limit the amount of optical information available to aquatic life. And chemical cues for olfaction are subject to changing currents and hydrodynamic, which can limit certain source information such as distance and location. However, acoustics are thought to be a primary sensory cue. And this is mainly due to the physical attributes that we just discussed and the difference between the density of water versus the density of air. So underwater sound travels far and fast, up to 4 to 5 times faster through water than through air, and sometimes across entire ocean basins. It does this at low levels of attenuation as sound propagates, and it happens relatively independent of changing hydrodynamics and currents. So you're able to get that important source information such as direction and distance. So sound and underwater sound is a reliable source of information for many aquatic organisms. Moving on to soundscapes, in the next few slides, I'll briefly discuss how we can use sound to monitor aquatic habitats. So what do I mean when I say soundscape? A soundscape can be defined as an acoustic signature of a specific habitat. And there are two main components of natural soundscapes. The first is the geophony, which are all the non-biological sounds within a given habitat, such as wind, waves, and rainfall. The second is the biophony, which are all of the sounds that arise from living organisms within that same habitat, such as vocalizations and movement. However, there is now a third component that is ubiquitous among contemporary soundscapes, and that is the anthrophony. And these are all the sounds that arise from human activities, and these have been shown to interfere with natural soundscapes. Now, what sort of information can we hope to gain from listening to soundscapes? A lot of this work has been pioneered by terrestrial research, and one of the big names is the gentleman in the bottom left corner, Dr. Bernie Krause. So terrestrial ecoacoustics have set a standard for using acoustics to quantify and monitor biodiversity. This includes data on species richness and abundance, taken and quantified from listening to soundscapes, and ultimately it allows us to make assessments of overall habitat quality for a given ecosystem. Acoustic diversity has even been shown to correlate well with forest complexity, and this allows for finer scale comparisons within a specific habitat. So we are able to quantify sound using what we call acoustic indices, and these allow us to make comparisons between and even within different habitats. And these terrestrial successes can be applied to the marine environment as well. And just to give an example of what this might look like, this is a figure from Erbitol 2015, and this work was from off the coast of Australia, and it was successful in identifying the three main components of soundscape through long-term recordings. So what you have in front of you is what we call a spectrogram. It allows us to visualize sound in 3 dimensions. So on the x-axis we have time, and this is over the entire month of September in 2012. On the y-axis we have frequency from 0 to 2000 hertz, and this is the kind of the main frequency range that we focus on when we're trying to look for activity in aquatic life. And then within the spectrogram you have differences in colors. And so the differences in colors are there to visualize the different intensities in sound. So the warmer colors tend to be higher sound. As you can see in the bottom left with the fin whales, a redder color means a higher level of sound. And then the cooler colors are lower levels of sound, as you can see kind of at the top here. And so by using spectrograms, we actually can identify and isolate different components of a soundscape. And as you can see, just they've circled examples of how to do this and identified what organisms or activities were creating these different signatures in the soundscape. So on the bottom left, we have the fin whales that they've circled. The top of this spectrogram here, you can see they've circled a fish chorus, wind and rain, the top right-hand corner over here, and then some ship noise activity kind of in the center of the spectrogram. So you're able to collect data and monitor the presence and absence of various components by taking these long-term recordings of soundscapes for a specific area. Since the Industrial Revolution, humans have been introducing novel sounds into the environment. If we reconsider our reef orchestra, it would actually be hard to find a completely pristine soundscape without the presence of human activity. As human populations grow and our use of coastal waters continues to expand, we are intentionally and unintentionally introducing undesired noise into these environments. Now, noise can be introduced into the marine environment through a variety of activities, either intentionally through acoustic survey activity or unintentionally through offshore construction, resource extraction, or vessel traffic. And these various sources of noise have been shown to affect aquatic life in a variety of ways. In fishes, damage to hearing, sensory systems, and physical anatomy has been directly linked with acoustic trauma, especially when introduced to impulsive sounds. Physiological stress has been shown to be affected by marine noise in a variety of taxa. One really good example of this is a decrease in the stress hormone levels of right whale populations following a decrease in vessel traffic after the events of September 11. In tropical juvenile fish, noise from motorboats was found to negatively affect prey survival and increase predatory success, demonstrating a direct fitness consequence of noise pollution. And lastly, reproduction is vital to population stability and intergenerational recruitment, and noise has also been shown to affect this and impair parental behaviors and overall offspring survival. One of the most pervasive sources of anthropogenic noise is vessel traffic. This is a map from marinetraffic.com, and it illustrates just how extensive boat traffic really is around the world. And we can imagine that the noise associated with this activity is just as pervasive. Now, this map mainly highlights larger vessels and shipping lanes, and smaller craft pose a particular issue because of their tendency to seek out areas of high biodiversity and tourism for recreation, such as coral reefs. Now, this has been a very brief introduction into anthropogenic noise and the various impacts that they have on wildlife. If you wanted to read more about this, I would definitely recommend these 2 meta-analyses on this slide here for more of a comprehensive view of this topic. So now that we've gone over some background information on underwater sound and noise pollution, I wanted to dive into some examples of how we can apply these principles. The first example is on marine acoustics and soundscapes, and this is from work published and led by my colleague Tim Gordon and I'd like to thank Tim for putting these slides together. And for more about this, you can actually refer to the article that was published late last year in Nature Communications. The aim of this work was to assess whether bioacoustics could be used as a management tool for reef restoration. Our team has been conducting research on the Great Barrier Reef for several years, and this has allowed us to monitor changes to soundscapes over that time. As you know, the Great Barrier Reef has been ravaged by climate change, and where we conduct our research on Lizard Island off the northeast coast of Queensland was not spared. By looking at the before and after of these events, Tim and our research group established that healthy reef noise before this devastation was actually more attractive to settling reef fish that are looking for a suitable habitat. The next stage and the main focus of this research was to use that healthy reef sound to potentially attract fish back to degraded habitat. To do this, we set up patch reefs throughout the lagoon at Lizard Island, and in a balanced design, we administered one of 3 treatments to each patch reef. Either that patch reef had no loudspeaker, a dummy loudspeaker, or a loudspeaker playing healthy reef noise. And we monitored recruitment to these patch reefs over an entire recruitment season. We found no difference in recruitment between the no speaker and dummy speaker treatments. The graph on the left shows the change in abundance over time, and this looks like it's just one treatment being plotted on the graph here, but that's actually 2 that are overlapping because they were no different from one another. The graph on the right shows the total number of fish on each reef after 40 days, and again, there's no difference between the dummy speaker or the no loudspeaker treatments. However, acoustically enriched patch reefs had significantly higher levels of recruitment. And we can see on the left that this started early on the left side of the graph and was maintained throughout the entire recruitment season. And in the right graph, we see that the overall abundance was about twice as high at the end of the 40-day experiment. And these differences were seen across all major trophic guilds. And at the end of the study, there were significantly higher levels of herbivores, mixed diet fish, planktivores, invertivores, and pescivores. And to put it all together, at the end of 40 days, acoustically enriched reefs had twice the total abundance of juvenile fish as the dummy speaker or no speaker reefs. Enriched reefs also had 50% greater species richness and greater diversity compared to the other 2 treatments. And again, there were no significant difference between the acoustically unmanipulated treatments. We can think of the relationship between acoustics and recruitment as a positive feedback loop. Not positive in the sense that it's a good outcome, but positive because these factors compound and build on one another. So settling fish use sound to hone in and navigate to find suitable habitats. And when you have a degraded reef with less sound, there will be less recruitment of fish to that reef because they are less able to hear and locate that specific location. However, this study hoped to change the acoustic signatures of reefs and try to reverse that harmful positive feedback loop. So by adding acoustic enrichment, we showed that this increased fish recruitment to degraded reefs. And in theory, we hope that this will reverse the harmful positive feedback loop to create one that is a beneficial feedback loop, where healthy reef sounds are recruiting more fish and sustaining healthier populations. Now, the last case study I wanted to discuss focuses on noise pollution. And this is work that we are currently trying to publish, so watch this space and hopefully you'll be able to read more about it in the near future. So the overall aim of this research was to assess the impacts of motorboat noise on parental care and nesting damselfish and evaluate a potential mitigation strategy for reducing noise and associated behavioral changes. Our study focuses on behavior of a common coral reef species, the ambon damselfish, Pomocentris ambonensis, and this is a well-studied, site-attached species that offers several advantages. First, you're able to observe important parental care over an entire breeding season, and we can monitor changes to natural behaviors and administer real sound that they would be exposed to in the wild. This fish will also readily spawn on artificial surfaces, in our case PVC half pipes, which allows us to observe clutches and experimentally manipulate the location of the nest. So this gives us a perfect marriage of ecological validity and experimental control, which is very important for field research. They're also a vocal species, and they actually make one of my favorite sounds I've ever heard from any animal, and I'll play that for you now. So they're a great species to study. And specifically, we're focusing on important parental behaviors of the ambon damselfish, both inside and outside the nest. So inside the nest, on the left here, we're focusing on egg tending behaviors. So that's behaviors such as fanning, cleaning the nest, digging. And I have a quick clip of a male swimming by his eggs and kind of fanning them. You'll see him do this wriggling behavior, and he's fanning the eggs to oxygenate them as he swims by. So right there, he's fanning them with his dorsal fin and his caudal tail as he's exiting the nest. On the right, outside of the nest, we have nest defense, and to do this, we actually introduced a conspecific male intruder in a plastic bag at a fixed distance outside of the nest, and we observed defensive behaviors against that intruding male. So time spent interacting with that male, pecking, chasing, displaying against that male. So in the video on the right, you'll see a male. The nesting male is in the water column further on the right of the video, and he'll come in to kind of aggressively interact with that intruding male. So there he is, kind of pecking at the bag, trying to get that male to go away. Of course, he's in a fixed distance, so he can't leave. And so we quantified and observed aggressive behaviors towards that intruding male. And we focused on really two main questions for this study. First, we wanted to look at, does exposure to motorboat noise impact parental care in nesting males? And this is both inside and outside the nest, as I demonstrated in the last slide. And then secondly, we wanted to look at whether the alteration of motor driving practice can mitigate the observed behavioral responses. This research was also completed at Lizard Island in the lagoon outside the research station, and we exposed males to noise from actual motorboats being driven at 6 lagoon locations. We first focused on egg tending and nest defense of the nesting males, and then we wanted to see whether or not this mitigation treatment, which was designed to reduce levels of noise exposure to males, could impact these behaviors. And the idea of this was to create acoustic buffer zones outside of each study area. What do I mean by acoustic buffer zone? Again, the idea was to reduce the levels of noise males were exposed to. And to do this, we restricted motoring practice with no boats being driven within 20 meters of the reef, dead slow speeds between 20 and 120 meters from the reef, and then fast driving only further than 120 meters away from the reef. And to illustrate how effective we were in reducing the amount of noise that we were exposing males to within these buffer zones, I've included spectrograms and audio clips for each of the 3 treatments. And I want you to remember that with spectrograms, cooler colors demonstrate lower levels of sound, and warmer colors, higher levels of sound. I want you to also listen for the crackling sound that you'll hear when I play these clips. And that is the sound of snapping shrimp, which typically dominate reef soundscapes. So starting with the ambient treatment. Again, so the spectrogram is a cooler color, demonstrating lower levels of sound, and you can hear that crackling of shrimp in the background. Next, I'll play the fast motoring sound. It's going to be a more intense sound, and I want you to try to listen out for the snapping shrimp. So here we have a much warmer signature for the spectrogram, illustrating higher levels of sound. And I don't know about you, but I was not able to hear the snapping shrimp in the background. So lastly, I'm going to play the mitigation treatment. Again, I want you to try to see if you can hear the crackling shrimp. You should just be able to catch it in the background. So here the spectrogram is much cooler, much more similar to the ambient treatment, demonstrating lower levels of sound. And we can just faintly hear the motorboat in the background, but we're also able to pick up on those snapping shrimp. Unfortunately, this work is still being published, and I can't include figures from it, but I'll briefly summarize our main findings. So inside the nest, we found that egg fanning decreased and vigilance increased with motorboat noise compared to our ambient sound control. And there are several reasons we think this might be occurring. First, the males themselves might be perceiving the loud noise as a threat. causing them to kind of look out for that threat more often, pause at the entrance of their nest, kind of observing their surroundings. Second, there might be a masking of important acoustic information with that loud sound, so males are having to compensate visually and expecting their environment more. With defensive behavior outside the nests, we found that sheltering and seeking refuge increased with the loud motorboat noise, and interaction with an intruding male decreased with loud motorboat noise. And then also with defensive behavior, when we applied our mitigation approach, we found that responses were not significantly different than our ambient sound control. This means that our mitigation effectively alleviated defensive behavior responses that we had observed during our loud motorboat treatment. And I wanted to end this particular segment on noise talking about current research, policy, and management for reducing vessel noise in our oceans. And a lot of this work is coming from research and management that is being done for marine mammal populations, specifically endangered killer whale populations off the west coast of the United States. And last year, Rob Williams and his group described three main areas for reducing vessel noise. Altering ship design, that includes propellers or the hull design, limiting speed, or considering large-scale rerouting. And actually, our study fits in with these bottom two. We limited speed, and then we increased the distance away from the coral reef that we were driving. And the conclusion of this second study focuses on coral reef protection. Marine mammal protection from noise is already underway, but what about fish and coral reefs? Coral reefs are areas of high biodiversity. They have high economic value. They provide food for over 1 billion people, and the negative impacts of motorboat noise calls for potential management solutions. And here we have evaluated a potential policy and management tool for mitigating noise impacts on coral reef ecosystems and fish populations. Going back to our aims, throughout this presentation we've discussed the principles of underwater sound and hearing, and how underwater sound is important for aquatic life. We went over the components of soundscapes and how we can use soundscapes and listen to them for conservation purposes. We discussed the types of anthropogenic noise in marine ecosystems and how noise impacts wildlife. And lastly, we went over 2 case studies for examples of how we can apply these principles. I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in, and thank you to Operation Wallacea for giving me the opportunity to present this information. I look forward to speaking with you again at the Q&A session and hope that you found this presentation enjoyable and informative. So thank you again.